Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you are enjoying the symposium so far and are really enjoying the wealth of information that is being shared, as well as the high caliber of discussions that are taking place. We're going to be continuing that with this upcoming panel that will focus on the business of excess soil. My name is Nadia Todorova, and I'm the Executive Director of the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario, or RCCAO for short, and I have the pleasure of moderating this session. For the next 45 minutes, I'm going to be joined by some incredibly knowledgeable participants as we discuss the various elements of excess soil management, including regulations in different jurisdictions, the cost of compliance, the changing industry standards, and also hear about some infrastructure projects and how they are managing excess soils. For RCCAO, as an alliance of labor and management construction groups that focuses on critical infrastructure issues, excess soils really represents a critical piece of the construction process. RCCAO has been involved in the responsible and beneficial reuse of excess soils in Ontario for over a decade. We are a proud participant and sponsor of the Excess Soil Symposium for the last several years as well. We have commissioned several reports into quantifying the volume of excess soils that infrastructure projects in Ontario generate. And for those reports, actually, we partnered with some of the organizations that are taking part of the symposium today, including the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers and the Greater Toronto Sewer and Water Main Contractor Associations. So let's get this started. We have a poll to kind of kick things off with, and the poll is going to be taking a look at what are some of the most pressing business challenges when it comes to excess soil management and the different factors that it encompasses. Is it navigating those various regulations? Is it the cost of compliance? Is it the changing industry demands? Or is it kind of all of the above? And as everyone is going to be putting in their answers to the poll, I want to give an opportunity to our esteemed panel to introduce themselves and provide a bit of commentary on their respective areas of expertise and focus when it comes to excess soils. I do have to say that Ryan Moniz from GFL Environmental, he was supposed to be part of this panel, but unfortunately something came up and he won't be joining us today. But we have a wealth of other panelists who will be here. And I'll start off with Freesia.
Hi, thank you, Nadia. And thank you everybody for having me here today. Freesia Waxman, I'm an environmental engineer with WSP. I work in contaminated land and brownfield realm, and I'm WSP's excess soil champion, which is a different way of saying that I've been heavily entrenched, as I like to say, in Ontario's excess soil regulation, and I'm a subject matter expert for WSP. So in that role, I've had the opportunity to act as the primary point of contact for all of WSP Ontario business lines with regard to excess soil related queries, opportunities, and initiatives. And one thing that you will quickly realize if you are new to the realm of regulated soil movement is that it affects a very wide range of business sectors, from rail and transit to brownfields and quarries. I work with internal and external stakeholders, and like many people on this, have conducted numerous educational presentations on the new excess soil reg in Ontario and the implications that that will have for our clients, which is far ranging. I'm also on QPCO's communication committee, and it makes me so happy to hear all these references to QPCO. So if you're not aware of what that is and what it involves, please check us out. We've also heard a lot about Ontario Regulation 40619 today, probably because it seems to be on the leading edge for regulated soil movement in Canada. But as the previous panel looked at, I just wanted to point out that nationally there's a lot of change taking place as well. So Nicholas spoke on what's happening in Quebec and the traceability requirements that came into effect November 1st this year. And those requirements are similar to the tracking requirements in Ontario. And interestingly, Trace Quebec, as it's called, has a mandatory fee, from my understanding, of $2 per ton. And that's roughly equivalent to $4 per cubic meter. And that's payable to the government and was also developed, their tracking system was developed and is administered by a third party, not-for-profit organization. That's a Testra. So that's pretty similar to RIPRA, which Denise also mentioned. And what this means is that, at least in Quebec, there's not the same market sector for soil tracking software as we've seen come into play in Ontario and the development of all these different excess soil tracking software applications. Also in Quebec, every stakeholder that's covered by the regulation must use the Trace Quebec, the electronic tracking system, and the requirement that triggers that is 200 metric tons, or roughly 400 cubic meters. So they do have that minimum threshold as well. And I just wanted to say that similar to Ontario's regulation, the Quebec regulation was staggered. I know Nicholas touched on that too, but they have it implemented so that it's per metric ton. So November 1st, it's applicable for projects with 5,000 metric tons or more that will be excavated. And then January 1st, they have that significant date coming into play as well this year. Any new work that's 1,000 metric tons or more, with exemptions for existing contracts as well, will be required to register and track their soil movement. And then on January 1st in 2023, there will be no more exemptions for existing contracts, and all new work, from my understanding, will then be required to track their movement. So a point when I was looking into the Quebec requirements that struck me as significant is that there's no specific requirement for QP oversight, although my colleagues tell me that some clients do still request that QP oversight, which is a little bit different than we have in Ontario. And Kate Branch previously mentioned British Columbia. So they're kind of the next province that's going to be up and coming with regulating soil relocation. And this is going to have a significant impact on the province's construction industry. All you have to do is look at, Ontario, and you can see that this is going to have an impact on the bottom line for these projects. The exact date for this coming into effect is not known at this time, but there's a theme when you're going to regulate across the provinces, and it seems to be, let's stop soil from going to landfills, and let's stop it moving outside of regulatory limits. And there's also that need for transparency from the public. These seem to be the drivers for our excess soil regulations. And as with Quebec and Ontario, it's anticipated that we'll see some type of publicly accessible notification or registry system as we have in Ontario. I also found it interesting that the BC regulation has an added component with regard to the duty to consult with Indigenous peoples and the preservation of archaeological artifacts at project sites. So the timing required for the notifications to be provided to those Indigenous people is one aspect of the regulation that, it could have a really significant impact on project timelines. And I'm sure that the ministry out there received a lot of comments and feedback on that for consideration, because it will have a large impact and could be critical for the timing of construction costs and projects. So just before I pass it over, I would say that BC, anybody out that way, if you are looking for do's and don'ts, have a look at Ontario's regulations, see where we've kind of have some lessons learned and what you can take from our regulation. Thanks, Nadia.
Great, thanks so much, Freesia. That's some great insight. I was trying to scribble some notes as you were talking, but great insight onto the interprovincial excess soil considerations. And it's unique that this time the symposium is taking a look at those Canada-wide excess soil regulations, which I think it's very beneficial. So I'm sure we'll come back to a lot of those themes that you highlighted. Bruce, I'll turn it over to you to provide a few remarks.
All right, thanks, Nadia. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Yeah, it's been a great virtual symposium so far. I'm honored to have been invited to speak here today, so thank you. I'm Bruce Tunnicliffe, president and founder of Vertex Environmental. We're a specialized environmental contractor, and as a result, we've been involved in portions of many interesting projects all across Canada, and especially in Ontario, which is where we're located. So I'm here just to introduce myself and then just talk briefly on resource recovery and give you an example. So resource recovery as in a soil reuse. To begin, I'll admit that I come at this from a contractor's perspective, not a consultant's perspective. But I believe regulation, I guess, is long overdue. With various climate change initiatives afoot, it's long seemed silly to me to be moving soil all over when we had the potential to address soils at or nearby our project sites. As a contractor, we need to follow the rules, and I'm happy to see a regulation that looks to set rules and view soil as a resource and not as a waste, and that ultimately looks to avoid trucking soil to landfills, and thus make maximum reuse of local soils, at least hopefully at the majority of upcoming projects. The largest project that I've been involved with from an excess soil perspective is the Waterfront Toronto Portland's work. And Megan James, as a keynote speaker, just spoke about this project earlier today. I hope you caught that talk. It was a pretty good talk by Megan. May she do many more. As you know, this is a major undertaking and has soil reuse as one of its core objectives. The site is a highlight project, I think, for doing good work regarding the reuse of excess soils. Vertex is working with QM, a contractor, on the site. And we're responsible for running the soil management area, or the SMA, down at Portland's. And I'd say it's currently one of, if not the largest, on-site treatment ventures relating to excess soil in Ontario. Soil is moved to the SMA from wherever it is dug from in the project area and is processed and treated under Vertex's environmental compliance approval, or ECA. And so from an Ontario excess soil point of view, this is a class 1 soil management area. The main treatment mechanism is bio. Just to compare this, if this were the old days, I'm not sure if this project would have even come about. Treating waste on site when soil was considered a waste was very difficult, especially once it was dug out of the ground. And treating waste from numerous different legal entities in one common treatment area, I think, was near impossible. And so I think that the intent of the excess soil regulation has allowed this project to become a reality. I mean, I credit maybe excess soil regulation, but many, many people at Waterfront and consultants which envisioned this and allowed it to be. And so just to give a quick example, and then I'll end my little intro here, is the SMA is constructed to handle hundreds of thousands of meter cubed of soil for treatment. And I think it's a great example of how a large public project can make very effective reuse of on-site contaminated soil. Just to show you how significant I think this is, consider this. If a dump truck can hold 10 meter cubed, if for each 100,000 meter cubed of soil that we treat in the SMA, 10,000 dump trucks are removed from the busy Toronto roads. QEW, the Gardner, the DVP, so you know, I guess Waterfront trying to say thank you for maybe better rush hours. Plus 10,000 dump trucks of backfill are removed to return. And so I did a quick calculation since I'm an engineer. If each truck only drove 50K round trip, which I think is probably small, then 20,000 trucks saved is 1 million kilometers of dump truck driving for every 100,000 meter cubed of soil treated in the SMA down to Portland's. And so 1 million kilometers is the same as driving one dump truck around the earth 25 times. So I think this is significant. And I think in the future, there'll be many amazing opportunities for this resource recovery with soil reuse on projects across Ontario and across Canada, and hopefully creating many more examples like this. So thanks a lot.
Absolutely, that was staggering statistics, Bruce. You know, as we're always trying to kind of improve traffic flow and improve congestion, I think people all kind of often underestimate the role that excess soil and proper recovery of that can make to that endeavor. So thank you very much for that. Those were some really fascinating statistics there. John, I'll turn it over to you, and you can kind of bring us home on the introductory part of this.
Sounds good. Thank you, Nadia. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on the panel and at the conference. So thank you again. For those who don't know me, my name is John Hibbard. I'm the Director of Environmental Services Projects at Secure. Secure, for those that are not familiar, is a Calgary-based environmental company, waste management firm. Secure earlier this year acquired Tervita and Nualta. A couple of years prior to that was acquired by Tervita. So in Western Canada, for those that have been in the industry a long time, Nualta, Tervita, and Secure have been three of the larger firms moving soil around the Western provinces, and now are one under the banner of Secure. Within the group that I'm responsible for, it encompasses our project work from Manitoba West, and we do some work in the Arctic as well. Over 50% of the work that we do is involved in soil remediation, soil movement. So soil relocation and how it works once regulations are created is near and dear to my heart and to the industry. I see a lot of differences between provinces. Much like Bruce, I won't be speaking as a regulator or a consultant. Most of my comments are around how I see things actually playing out. So in our world, we will get a client request to move 5,000 meters of soil with X type of contamination, and given 3 weeks to find the best solution for that, and in multiple jurisdictions. And we have to deal with that challenge. And that's presented to us on a daily and weekly basis. Trends in the industry. So every province is a little bit different. I think the trends are related as much to the availability of suppliers, or in our marketplace would be landfills or soil treatment facilities, as well as to what are client motivations. So I'll try and explain that in a slightly different way, in that in British Columbia and Manitoba, you have markets with limited disposal options. British Columbia is a very busy market with construction. Manitoba, a little bit more steady, but not quite as busy. Alberta and Saskatchewan, you have lots of options for disposal. In those provinces, Alberta's very busy, Saskatchewan less busy. So between those four provinces, I see the regulations have developed slightly in response to what is the availability of facilities and how busy is the market. So what you've seen in British Columbia, I think, is quite similar to Ontario. And I think there's some good lessons learned. And I'll touch on those in another question here moving forward. But very similar in that the construction market has been extremely busy the past decade. Soil has been moving all over the province, primarily in the South Coast and on Vancouver Island. And it's driven regulation because it's created problems, much like you're seeing in Ontario, with a lot of trucks moving, not many options for disposal, lengthy requirements to do some sort of on-site treatment or on-site reuse programs. And you're seeing the constant development of these regulations. And Kate went over some of those in a previous session that'll be relevant for this conversation. In all markets, when you talk to customers, talk to regulators, people want to find better ways to reuse soils. But when the market is presented with an opportunity to move soil, we must work within the constraints that we have, or the regulations that we have, also with the motivations that clients have, and we have to work under those. So we're always balancing those things. A company like ours is always going to be, I believe, at the forefront of protecting our client obligations as well as acting under the regulations. But I see all sorts of things in the market that we can talk about shortly. So I'll pass it back to the panel before we dive into some examples.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I have to say, you guys are amazing, because you're already generating quite a bit of questions just from your introductory remarks. So definitely have a star team here. So perhaps, and for the audience, if you have any more questions, please shoot them over our way. So I'll start off with a question from the audience, and maybe please, the whole panel, jump in, but maybe I'll give an opportunity for Freesia to start us off. So there's a few different parts to this question, so excuse me as I read it. What are the different geographies within Ontario and municipalities, and what are they doing with their liquid soils? Are they sending it to landfill, but not sure that's strictly permitted unless they have specific approvals? Are they outsourcing it to hydrovac companies? Are they setting up their own yards with the appropriate approvals, or finding other setup that could work?
Okay, yeah, there is a lot in that question.
Yeah.
Um, if a lot of the time liquid soil is dealt with through vac trucks and hydrovacking, and those operations will need to take their liquid soil to a licensed facility. So liquid soil is now a waste under this regulation, and sites that accept it generally need to have an ECA in place in order to accept that waste and deal with it appropriately. If you're generating liquid soil within your project area, now we have provisions to allow for certain types of operations to turn that liquid soil to soil, so to dewater it, to add polymers, etc. Those are great great provisions that we can use to address liquid soil issues now. And some municipalities are also looking at putting instruments in place, so whether that's site alteration plans or permits for certain reuse sites to be able to accept liquid soil. So there are those reuse sites that do have an instrument. It's not an ECA, but they are legally allowed to accept that liquid soil. So there are multiple options going on, and I'm not sure if I covered everything in that question. So anybody else, please jump in.
Yeah, I was going to say, Bruce, John, anything to add on? There's also, yeah, I think you covered it high level. I was just reading the question again, but Bruce, John, I'm sure you guys can add something as well if you'd like.
I'll just add a quick comment. I think the liquid soils is really challenging because obviously you just have solid soils, you can take them to a variety of places, but liquid soil, nobody really wants them, and a lot of times need to be permitted to treat them. I was actually just at a facility last week. It's called Ecovacs, and they take soil and they try to fully recycle it, which I thought was very sustainable of them. They take the soil, they crush it to squeeze out the water, they treat the water, then they reload the hydrovac trucks with the clean water again. And it seems like a very sustainable process. I don't know if more operations like this will come to be, but they're sort of, I don't know, floundering along as the rules change, but I think they'll become more in demand. So I think we'll see from a business perspective, things like this change, operations like that change. And I would also hope that the Ministry of the Environment would flex a little bit in what they allow for on-site treatment, because it seems a bit of a waste to be in a sustainability and climate change type environment and then tell a hydrovac with clean water and clean soil to drive 85 kilometers round trip to go dump it somewhere just to treat it. So it would be my hope that the Ministry of the Environment would allow more of this in the future, some on-site treatment of some kind, as long as it's controlled.
Yeah, and just speaking from other jurisdictions, firstly, it doesn't change, at least within Western Canada, I believe in Ontario, it doesn't change between municipalities. So it's provincially driven what's a liquid or solid waste. Generally, liquid soils, or I would call it sludge, is typically used in the industry as terminology. There's specific facilities that take that, or you can deal with it on site. I've been involved in some large soil dewatering projects where on-site clients have been able to get approvals to do some dewatering process and then take that soil either to reuse on site or for final disposal somewhere else if it's contaminated or hazardous. But there are lots of different dewatering options out there. But again, it takes some time and planning on the client side of things, but can be a great way to reuse soil, especially if you're doing some sort of pond or ocean dredging type programs. And normally those sites also need fill because they're involved in large construction projects. So lots of opportunities there. Technologies exist, but you do need to understand when something is a sludge versus a soil, and that's generally provincially regulated, what that definition is.
Absolutely. We have another question from the audience, but I'm just going to tie it to the results of the poll. So unsurprisingly, so the question was, what is the most pressing business challenges of excess soils for you? The first one was navigating the various regulations in different jurisdictions. The second one was the cost of compliance. The third one was meeting the demands of the changing industry standards. And then the fourth one was all of the above. So unsurprisingly, 40 participants, or about half, staff said it's all of the above. But the cost of compliance is something that does come up quite often. 11 people noted it as their top concern. And that leads me to kind of one of the next question that we have from the audience is, how does the new regulation impact the cost and the price of soil disposal? So Bruce, maybe we can start off with you and then everyone else can jump in.
Okay, sounds good. So I think this is hard to predict, at least for me and my view of the industry, but I will take a stab at it. I think the cost of soil disposal could go up or down. And I know that's a wishy-washy answer, but I'll explain. I think the cost could go up because before you used to be able to sample just a couple samples from a job site. If it was a green field, everyone assumed it was clean and it could move quite easily. But now, depending on the volume that you excavate, you'd have to meet the rules of the regulation in terms of sampling. And it's a lot of samples, including leachability and a variety of parameters. And so I think that the analytical cost for moving soil is going to be a lot higher. And I also think the cost is going to be higher with all of the various reports that are needed and tracking that you need to do. So if you had clean soil from a project that you may be able to move somewhere relatively inexpensively, that is going to become more expensive in ways that I think that the soil could decrease in price is that I think that they're depending on the infrastructure project and the development that's going on within a city. You may find great benefit in having a receiving site or being a generating site at a time when the opposite is needed. So if you're generating soil and there's a great demand for soil in the industry and you've got your testing programs all in place, and the receiving soils, who knows, they may pay you to take your soil from you in order to fill an area that fully meets the excess soil regulation. And so I think it's going to be a matter of luck in some ways over how much soil is available. And I also believe it depends who gets involved. If there's soil brokers or land bankers or other people that get involved to say, yeah, sure, you can keep your soil here, while your timing is off, while you're generating soil, but you don't know where to put it, then it's up to the price that whatever the land banker or the broker sets as well. And so if I had to guess, I would say it's not going to be as easy to get rid of clean soil as it was, and probably the cost of compliance would go up. A final thought is on contaminated soil. I think deregulating soil that was classified as a waste and now is viewed as a resource will allow on-site treatment. And if your land space is large enough and your site is got enough time, if you can do something like we're doing down to Portland's, which is bioremediation of soil, that is way cheaper than having to take it to a landfill and pay the tipping fees and then drive clean soil back. And so I think contaminated soil, if you have the right site, could actually be a lower cost in the future if you can treat it on a property.
Yeah, if I can jump in. Yes, I agree. I agree with Bruce. It's going to be somewhat cyclical and supply and demand driven. Right now, what we're seeing is a shortage in reuse sites, and that's leading to some creative thinking as far as some of our clients wanting to accept more soil for beneficial purposes because they can charge a premium to accept that material. If you have a site that is a brownfield and you have an instrument such as a certificate of property use on it, you have the ability to accept soil with elevated concentrations of contaminants that other sites won't be able to accept. And that could be seen as a definite market advantage. And I have been involved in large soil movement projects where, we've saved the clients millions of dollars by not sending that soil to landfill because we happen to be able to match them up with the appropriate reuse site that could accept that material. And it's a win-win situation for everybody because the reuse site was able to pay for all of their civil and development costs through the tipping fees that they were able to generate. So I also think that you're definitely going to see hydrovac charges increase because with that change in the liquid soil designation to a waste, some of these smaller liquid soil receiving facilities have just gone under because they've been shut down by the MECP. They don't have their ECAs in place, et cetera. So until there's an increase in the marketplace of these sites, then I think the fees will have to go up.
From my perspective, first, just on the cyclical nature of things, I thought of a site that we have in Regina, and it's a soil remediation site where we would take contaminated soil and treat it with the purpose be for reuse. We've had this site for over a decade, and it currently is full of treated soil, and we can't find a reuse home for it because there just aren't enough large excavation sites in the Regina area. And we're trying to find home, and eventually we're going to have to move some of that soil, and hopefully we can find spots for it. So as mentioned, cyclical nature, the price of your project of soil often has to do with, okay, if you can treat it, where is that next site? So you still need that. Hopefully it's the same site and you don't need to move it anywhere, but sometimes you have to. I'm going to, I think a really good learning for this group, who I think is primarily Central Canada focused, is on BC. So as mentioned, Kate went through the regulations the last section, and Freesia mentioned that these changes are coming. BC actually did move to a soil reuse regime about 5 years ago. I think it was about 6 years ago, with the intention to do what Ontario is doing now. And there were some unintended consequences of that it's trying to deal with now, that I think people in Ontario should be looking at. And I know that I've spent some time with the regulators in British Columbia understanding, but for the market to understand, which I think is important. So I just went over BC's concerns and what ended up happening. So number one of the four concerns, soil has been relocated outside of regulatory requirements. So when you create requirements that some people may seem as burdensome or uncertain of how to do the paperwork, they're going to move it somewhere. And generally that's federal land, somewhere where they don't have to do that. And that ended up happening a lot in BC. Number two, that burdensome relocation provisions drive soil to landfills rather than beneficial reuse. So it may be seen as difficult to send it to a site that actually needs it. So there's too much paperwork. Maybe there's some requirements that they're uncertain with. So I'm just going to send it to a landfill. So they saw that happening, and actually material continued to go to landfills of a certain nature. The provisions add delays without clearly supporting environmental protection. So there was an impression in the contracting industry when, oh, before these regulations came in, it cost me $100 a box to get rid of my soil. Well, now it costs me $180 because I need to do this, that, and the other, and site X is no longer accepting soil. And I don't even think that these are things that help protect the environment. So you create that attitude in the industry, which is quite interesting when you look at the intention of these things. And then last, there's no ministry oversight on the relocation of uncontaminated soil. So you create these regulations, you need to have a clear path, and you need some checks and balances along the way. So what ended up happening the last 5 years from my perspective, working in the industry, is number one, a lot of large soil fill sites were created. And a fill site is what, before the regulations, I would have called a landfill, but they were sites that would be on commercial or industrial land that would take commercial or industrial level soil and say, well, no, we can accept it here under soil relocation. We're going to reuse this soil because we need to fill the site for future development. The reality is that some of those sites, and now the ministry is dealing with them, were quasi landfills. They weren't developed, they weren't designed, built to be a landfill with proper measures in place, but they were created under this regime. So I would watch for that in Ontario. You'll have some companies just saying, well, this will one day be an industrial park. Well, is it? What's the plan for that? Have you developed that plan? Are there permits in place? And now BC is dealing with that problem. The other problem that happened is a lot of the so the construction industry got very busy here. And a lot of the small sites, so you'll be removing an underground heating tank from your home, and you'll be moving just a couple yards of soil out. Those kind of jobs stopped going to soil relocation sites. They stopped going to landfills, and they started going to completely illegal or sites that were creating what they would call blanket approvals for certain types of soil. and talking to a lot of people in the residential construction market and asking them, what are you doing with your soil? Because a company like ours isn't receiving it. None of my competitors are receiving it. What are you guys doing? And a lot of the soil would go to very interesting places I won't go into here, which are the same problems that Ontario has been dealing with for a number of years now. So creating these regimes doesn't necessarily address all these problems. You need to see how it plays out and then deal with the after effects in the future. But it's been really interesting to see that and how it actually played out in BC the past few years. Thanks, Nadia.
Absolutely. Great. We have a few more questions from the audience. I am being mindful of time. We do have a hard stop at 2:45, so perhaps we could do one or two more. This one, I will read it out and you guys can decide who gets it, even though they mentioned Bruce or other panelists, but we'll decide that. So infrastructure projects by their nature are net generators of excess soils. I'm interested to know if Bruce or the other panelists have ideas on how municipalities can process reclaimed soil to be able to reuse it within the right of way or on other types of municipal projects.
I can chime in quick. So I'll be honest and say I don't know exactly, but I would think that we're going to figure it out. And by that, I mean, I started my talk here today to say I find it really silly that soil is moved all over the place in Ontario when we could probably be a little more efficient and do it. And so I think if some municipalities have a need, and well, the other thing is governments can plan longer ahead than some other people can, private sectors say at times. And so if a municipality knows that a large infrastructure project is ongoing or coming up and they have a need for infill somewhere, then I think it's a logical sense to link the two parties up. And I had a thought before coming on here to speak here today. And I think of a model like Uber, where Uber, they've got these drivers that they just sign up. I don't know if you ever talked to an Uber driver, but they can sign up and take rides. And when they don't want to, they just sign off. It's not like they've got this constant staff that's there. It's a very interesting model, but somehow it works. And if there's less Uber drivers out there, then the price goes up. And then all of a sudden, more Uber drivers want to hop in. And so, I wonder if there's a way to do that within the soil area where if a municipality needs soil and another infrastructure project has to get rid of it, and they're both government entities, like why couldn't they pass it over efficiently for free? And so I have a feeling technology and Uber type app or software or something may come up and allow that to more efficiently happen. Because right now the reason it's not happening is a lack of knowledge, not knowing where the soil is going to come from or what it might look like. But I think we'll get better and better at knowing that as the months and years go on. And so that's why I say I don't have an answer, but I think there will be a solution. And I hope that it would happen relatively soon when we become better at information sharing.
Yeah, I guess if I can jump in next to Moniz's question. There's been a lot of question around the granular subbase on road projects, and does that constitute excess soil? It's granular material, but in order to be rock, according to the regulation, it needs to be less than 2 millimeters, and there's no definition there's no percentage included in that definition of excess soil or rock for a percentage of fines. So if you have a grain A, grain B, type of material, you can have a wide range of fines in there, and it may be classified as excess soil. So one way to reduce your volume of excess soil would be to potentially, if needed, process that granular material, that subbase material on site so that you're screening it, so that then you really do have just that rock material that isn't subject to the excess soil requirements, and then deal with that lessened volume of soil. It doesn't help with the subsurface soil, but at least that's one suggestion that may be viable depending on your project.
Yeah, I'll give two thoughts on this. Number one being that, yes, that's something municipalities should be doing, as was mentioned, but it can be challenging because municipalities don't necessarily work together on everything, as we know. But what you should be looking for when you're doing that, a lot of people talk about, think about soil. Oh, you can move soil from one site to the other. Most municipalities should be sharing what large projects they're doing, but what's critical to that as well, which is sometimes overlooked, is what's the geotechnical spec of that soil. So if you're moving from one municipality to another, they might have completely different conditions. They might have different designs for construction projects. So that's a critical piece. And I've found a challenge sometimes in moving soil from one municipality to another, or one construction project to another. It may fit the environmental standards, but it might not fit the geotechnical standards of that new site. So that's really important for people to look out for. One other example I'd like to give is in the province of Alberta. And what they've done is the organization called Innovate Alberta. They're trying to get municipalities, and more specifically some of the oil producers, to work together and to share soil when they're doing major closure programs. So they'll do a closure program over a large area that will encompass dozens to hundreds of sites. And they've seen a lot of inefficiencies in that. Bruce talked about trucking earlier. The trucking in Alberta is excessive, especially when you're trying to close all of these oil gas sites that are in remote areas. So what if you could try and reuse the soil between sites, risk assess, leave some soil on site, take the contaminated stuff, take it to a central area and treat it, and then reuse it for a series of sites. And they found over the years that what I would consider my customers, but the oil and gas producers, they don't talk together that well necessarily. So the province, through Innovate Alberta, is trying to facilitate that conversation, if you will, and create these opportunities. So I think for that to work in a place like Ontario, you've got municipalities, but perhaps there needs to be an organization that helps facilitate that conversation so that we can better share soil between municipalities.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. We have a bit of a comment and a question, and we only have 4 minutes to address it. So maybe we'll do like a quick 1 minute fireside response. So I'll read it out to you guys. In rural Ontario, excess soil is becoming difficult to dispose of because farmers do not want to deal with all the paperwork. What are some things that, we can tell Christine in terms of how to address that?
I guess I can go first. That seems to be the order of things. You know what, I think one thing that may change, and you'd have to have an aggregate pit nearby, but one of the things in Ontario is there's quite a few aggregate pits around. I have a feeling that a lot of excess soil will go there, and I don't know how to get farmers to fill out paperwork in order to do that. So it may just be a very difficult process, unless of course there's a very efficient boilerplate way of allowing that to happen.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe you could develop a standard kind of, I guess, boilerplate response that you could forward to or provide to those farmers. But I think that you may also have to look at shouldering the cost for providing a QP for those receiving sites that are not as educated as municipalities. So that may be coming down the line, and that might be something that you have to look into actually doing.
Yeah, I was going to say it sounds like an opportunity for a consulting firm to create something that might help simplify the process, or at least the understanding for some of those that sector or that client base.
Super. Well, thank you guys so much. As we can all tell, we could continue this conversation for many more hours. So thank you very much for joining and for all the insightful information and just sharing your knowledge with us. We really appreciate it. I am going to be just thanking every one of you. We're very respectful of the insight that you've provided. There's a networking break that's going to be coming up, followed by the last panel of the day, which will be focusing on the best practices in next six soil implementation. So stay tuned for that as well. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you, Nadia. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Nadia.
Bye, everyone.